Good morning. Go ahead and turn to Genesis 34. I guess that's sort of where we'll begin this morning. We're continuing our study looking at the genealogy of Jesus as recorded in Luke chapter 3 and Matthew chapter 1. And we're going through this list of people to kind of understand more of what God had in mind. What was his plan here? And kind of looking at these people and how he made these things come to fruition by the time we get to the New Testament. And so we've been talking about Jacob the last couple weeks. It's taken a little longer with Jacob than I initially thought, but I've learned to maybe lower my expectations on how quickly we'll get through this. And that's fine. If we have discussion, we want to encourage that. There's obviously a lot of great lessons that we can go through and see here in the book of Genesis. Even though we're not reading all of these in full, we're just kind of doing some quick summaries and maybe picking out one or two things to note. These histories are important to understand when they talk about these people later on, especially people like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when they're referred to in the, not even just the New Testament, but even just later times in the Old Testament, really gives us more of an understanding of what God was really trying to do. But we kind of have to understand this history first. So I don't mind going through it, taking some time, even though we're not reading every single verse here. We're just kind of doing a quick discussion of it and then kind of moving on. But if we need to stop, just stop me, because I'll try to get as much ground covered as I can, because I do want to get through the history at some point. And then go ahead, and we probably will have to wait till next week to do this, but then go ahead and talk about Jacob as he is discussed as a person, or his relationship with God and what God's plan was with him, as it's talked about in later verses past his own time period. So we stopped at the end of Genesis 33 last week, talking about, I think the last thing we talked about was Jacob's sort of reunion with Esau. They will have one more meeting after that, but it's very brief. It's not really discussed too much. We might just mention it. But for the most part, that's going to be the end of, well, perhaps the few that they've had, and they've kind of moved on. They're going to be going their separate ways by and large. So looking at Genesis 34, and actually before I get into that, one thing I do want to mention, because I was thinking about this beforehand, Genesis 34 and onward, we're going to see some of Jacob's children involve themselves and have their own sort of agency here, especially 34. We're going to see how they decide to do things, not necessarily with his permission. We know it's not with his permission. Let's just say it that way. And we're going to see more of that as we continue on through Genesis. Jacob has plans, has ideas, and his kids have their own ideas. And that's going to cause problems. But probably we haven't seen much of that yet, because they probably weren't old enough to have that own agency yet. They're now at the point where they definitely have their own agency. We're going to see how that plays out. But just something to notice here is it's not really going to be, Jacob's not really going to be the focus from here on out. It's going to be Jacob and his family and how he works with his family. And then when we get to the story of Joseph and him going to Egypt, of course, Genesis is going to follow Joseph. But right now we're trying to focus on Jacob. I'm really actually going to try to avoid talking about Joseph too much outside of Jacob, because the genealogy of Christ does not go through Joseph. This is something that a lot of people just kind of forget, because, well, the narrative of Genesis follows him. Wouldn't it make sense? We've had Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Wouldn't it follow Joseph? But it's actually Judah is the one. We kind of just forget that if we don't think about it sometimes. So I'm largely not going to talk about Joseph too much unless it relates to Jacob, or later on when we start talking about Judah, how it relates to Judah. And there are some things, so it won't be completely untalked about. But if it seems like I'm skipping like a big chunk of Genesis, well, I kind of am, because I'm not here really to talk about Joseph, though he is a key figure. I'm not going to say he isn't. But as I said before, we get here to Genesis 34, and this is kind of the story of Jacob and his family and their interactions with the people of the city of Shechem. Now, Jacob had one daughter, Dinah. We've mentioned her before. She was the daughter of Leah, and she visits the women of the land, and Shechem the ruler of the land, the son of Hamor the Hivite, it's described as he's drawn to her, and he lies with her, or he violates her, defiles her, depending on your translations. This is not something that should have been done, is the indication here. This was not something that was right. And Jacob hears about this. We're not told how exactly, but he keeps it to himself until his sons return from the field. Hamor, the father of Shechem, comes to Jacob, and they try to work out this issue. This is something that wasn't supposed to happen. This was not something that they intended, but now they're going to try to work it out, which, all sides at least seem to be interested in diplomacy. So that's not the worst thing here. So they're trying to work it out. Hamor suggests to Jacob that, let's just have our families intermarry. We'll give our sons to your daughters and vice versa, and we'll just become one people. It'll be great. We'll be a big happy family. And if you think about it, as far as a point of safety, if you have a bigger family, a bigger nation, that's a good thing. Safety in numbers, if you will. But of course, this is not really God's intention here. This is not going to be His plan. This would allow them to have property. This would allow them to trade, good relations. It should be a good thing. Shechem appeals to Jacob and his sons. He says, I'll pay whatever the price they ask for to have Dinah as a bride. But Jacob's sons are furious, and this is what I mean. Like, they have their own agency here. They're not so interested in this arrangement as Jacob is. They're furious. They refuse to allow this. And they say on the grounds that Shechem and his people, they're uncircumcised. They're not part of our promise. If we go back to the time of Abraham, when that was established, they're not part of that promise. They're not one of us. And Hamor and Shechem agree that, we're going to make this okay. We're going to have all the males of the land circumcised so that Shechem can have Dinah as a wife, so the families can intermarry, so that Jacob's possessions, all become theirs. There's going to be this reunion. That's what they're planning. And all the men comply with this order from Hamor, which, that shows he's got some authority here. They're all going to comply with that. All the men of the city comply. Shechem, Hamor, all the men are circumcised. 3 days later, while the men of the city are still recovering, Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, this would be the second and the third born sons. I'm bringing that up because this is probably going to come up later. We'll talk about Judah a little bit. The second and third born sons, Simeon and Levi, they go through the city and they kill all the men in the city, including Shechem and Hamor. They take Dinah away from the city, and they take. We have all the flocks and the herds are taken as well. They plunder the houses. There's these two men, and that's the description. It's these two guys go through and they do all this action, and then there's this great plunder of the city. And Jacob scolds his sons, Simeon and Levi, for their actions, because now he says we're a stench now. He's talking about his family. We're a stench to all the nations around us. We've done something that they're going to hear about. This is not going to go unnoticed, and they're going to know, like, hey, these people, they can't be dealt with. Like, these are not negotiable people. They did something bad. I guess I'll put it that way. That's the simplest way. So they're going to be seen as hostile to the Canaanites, the Perizzites, and they're afraid that now these other nations are going to combine and destroy them. And Simeon and Levi respond with this question. They say, should he have treated our sister like a prostitute? And it kind of just leaves it like that. So it's like, well, what's the question? Who is right here? Who is in the right? And I'm going to just kind of address it in my own opinion. I think everybody was pretty much wrong when it came to this. Everybody did something wrong here. But it's very interesting that this is Simeon and Levi doing it. It's not Reuben. Now, we're going to talk about Reuben probably a little bit more in passing as we talk about Jacob and his relationship with his sons. But this was not an idea of the firstborn son, the one that would be, quote, in charge, after the father. This was not his idea, apparently. He didn't seem to be involved in this initial plot. But Simeon and Levi have this fervor. They have this huge issue with this, and they take matters into their own hands, even against the wishes of their father. It's a very interesting story, but of course we can see how God is working through this, and we'll probably talk more about this in a bit as regards to Jacob's relationship with his sons individually. Comments, questions about this story? This is kind of an interesting one, so I wanted to pause and give any. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, this is first-class treachery. To use, I mean, you're getting worse than this. To use God's command, the idea, and mix that in with somehow a thought that they're being righteous in what they're doing in order to kill people. I can't imagine. It would be even worse than luring a child into a situation by doing good to them in order to abuse them. I mean, there just is, and the Lord doesn't. I know that these people don't yet have a law, but this is basic. Jacob seems to indicate that even the other nations are going to recognize this is not right. You don't do this sort of thing. And we need to look at our own conduct in our lives to make sure that we are not being self-serving with God's law. And this is what this was. They were offended. They didn't know any better way to voice it than to cloak it in a righteous thing and then do something horrible. And so this is one of the really bad incidences of the Bible. It doesn't get any worse than that.
Yeah, and this is kind of the thing that probably comes up more now than ever. Whenever an issue of war or conflict comes up, everyone likes to figure out who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. Sometimes there are no good guys. That's often the truth. Everyone has their own issue in this process. But I'm not going to go into too much of a breakdown of it because this could be a whole other study in itself. But God is going to make something of this. This is not something that has thrown off the plan of God here. God is going to work with this situation, and we'll see how it unfolds as we go. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of bad stuff going on here, and you can look at both sides and say, well, who was right here? Who was in the wrong? Pretty much everybody was in the wrong here. And now I will say that Jacob at least seems to be the more reasonable one, but I don't know. There are probably some things that we can make as a question of how did we even get to this point? Why is this even getting to this point where this is happening? Jacob has maybe made some poor decisions on that, but then again, that we're getting on another topic there. So yeah, that's about all I have to say about that situation. Unless anyone has any other comments on that, we'll move on to 35. Okay. When we look at Genesis 35, in the first half here, verses 1 through 15, we see that God calls upon Jacob to return to Bethel and to build an altar to God there. So he seems to be, he's looking for a place to go maybe because of all this issue with Shechem. Now he's got a place to go. We're not exactly sure how much time has passed in between here. We don't always get those indications. But that's his next destination. So Jacob prepares his household to go to Bethel. But before they go, Jacob commands that everyone should give up their idols, their false gods, to purify themselves, to change their clothes. So he's giving a very interesting command here. And we've kind of mentioned this before is, wait, what idols? I think they shouldn't be having idols. And the answer is, yeah, they shouldn't be. But they do talk about, they have these idols, and I assume this is maybe going to include the ones that Rachel stole from Laban. Is it exclusively those? I'm going to feel probably not, because we don't even know if Jacob even knew about that. We're not told. Most indications are that he didn't know about that, but he must have known that some people had idols somewhere and were not fully devoted to God. So he gives this command. They take them and they bury them under an oak in Shechem. So any of those idols, including the ones that Rachel stole from Laban, I assume all stopped there. So that's the end of that loose end, if you will, for those of you keeping track of those at home. We don't really know anything about any others. Those are the only ones we're told about through this narrative. But I'm sure there are others that would make the most sense to me. Why they are there? That's a good question. Aside from the ones from Laban, and we're not told about any others, why would they have idols? This is Jacob's household. He is clearly faithful to God and all of the things he's trying to do here, as was Isaac and Jacob, or as Isaac and Abraham were. So it makes you wonder, where did these idols come from? Now, we can make some assumptions. Perhaps people in the land they were living, they had contact with them, including people of Shechem, but not exclusively. It could also be other idols from Laban's household were taken, or any of the other members of that household who had their own while they were there may have brought them with them. We're not told about those, but those are fully plausible. It's not out of the realm of plausibility there. So we're told then that as they traveled to Bethel, and my translation uses the phrase terror of God. I'm not sure what everyone else's translations say there. But the terror of God was upon the surrounding inhabitants so that they did not attack Jacob. So this was something that Jacob was fearful of after this incident in chapter 34, that the other nations around might attack them because this is a hostile people. We got to get rid of them. Look at what they did to Shechem over here. But the terror of God is upon them. So God has seen what has happened, and he's providing protection here for Jacob. But it's very clear that God is interceding here. How he's doing that exactly, what this terror of God is, we're not fully clear on, but God is definitely here protecting his family. So they don't attack Jacob. And when Jacob and his party reach Bethel, he builds the altar as he was told to do. We do have a short note here about Rebekah's nurse dying, being buried here. I don't really have a lot of things I want to say about that. That's just something that's mentioned there. There's probably more we could say, but I'm trying to keep the scope on Jacob here. While Jacob is in Bethel, God appears to him, blesses him, again states that he shall no longer be known as Jacob, he shall be called Israel. Now, I've brought this up before. It's a very interesting thing because it's not the first time something like this has happened. Abraham is originally Abram when he's born, and when God changes his name to Abraham, he's always called Abraham after that. Same with Sarah. She's Sarai, and then she gets her name changed to Sarah, and she's always called Sarah after this. For whatever reason, Jacob gets his name changed to Israel, but he's usually often referred to as Jacob after that, even though he's had his name changed to Israel. And I'm not always sure about why that's the case. My guess, and this is just me, is that this is to help differentiate between Jacob the person or Israel the person, so he calls Jacob, and then the nation, which they typically will refer to Israel. But that's not always 100% true either. So if you'll come up with a better explanation on that, I'm sure there's one out there, because it's not a 100% good rule, but tends to be the case. But just an interesting thing. I just find that a little bit funny. So God also tells Jacob that a line of kings will be among his descendants, which will happen. And I want to put this forward here now. Both physically and spiritually, a line of kings is going to descend from him. We'll kind of talk about that probably as we get through Judah, and then his descendants. You probably know the ones I'm thinking of. But this is God telling us these things way ahead of time. Now, Jacob is not a poor vagabond, even though he doesn't really have a place where he stays 100% of the time. He's got some wealth to him. He's got flocks and herds. He's got a large family. This is the case for Isaac and Abraham before him. So it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that, hey, a great nation's going to come from you at some point. But God is specifically saying you're going to have a line of kings, great kings that are going to come from you. There is no way that Jacob would have known that when you get to, the Israelites being in Egypt, generations later, going back into the promised land, conquering it, and then you do actually have a line of physical kings here. I mean, Saul is going to be a king from the tribe of Benjamin, and then you've got David, who's going to be the king from the tribe of Judah, and then we'll go on from there. You've got a line of kings physically, but also I think spiritually we have this implication here, and I don't think we can look at this and say, well, this isn't talking about Jesus either. I think it is also referring to Jesus here. And we'll probably talk about that more, about the issue of kingship and that kind of authority when we talk about David later on in this study, because there really is a lot there, not just physically, but spiritually, symbolically. So just an interesting note there. So afterwards, Jacob, he sets up a stone where God had talked to him. He pours a drink offering on the stone. It's similar to what he did to the rock he uses as pillow in Genesis 28, verse 18, if you remember that instance. So God is clearly with Jacob, and Jacob knows this. There's not this fear of, is God going to really be with us? He's going to stay with us all the time. This is a really great confirmation to Jacob in a very similar way that God did this with Abraham, that I'm with you. You may not understand how things are going to work out or how the timetable is going to work, but here's my promise, and I'm going to protect you. And we know he has been, because the fact that he even got to Bethel unscathed is because God was basically interceding and putting terror upon the other nations. Comments about this interaction between God and Jacob here? Okay, when we get to verse 16, we see that Jacob's household is leaving Bethel. Along the way, Rachel is giving birth to a son. She has difficulty. She dies in the process. But before she does, she names the son Ben-Onai with her last breath, meaning son of my trouble, which is a tragic name for a child. So Jacob renames him to Benjamin, meaning son of my right hand. So we see that Rachel is buried along the way to Ephrath, or Bethlehem. They continue on to Migdal Eder, and while living in the area, Reuben, now here we go talking more about Jacob's sons and the things they do. This is Reuben, the firstborn, the oldest son of Jacob. He sleeps with Bilhah, Jacob's concubine. This would have been Rachel's maidservant. There's not a lot really described in here except that Jacob knew about it. We're not told anything that happens immediately afterward or really what anyone else thinks about it, which I don't think this is forgotten about. He hears about it, and he's going to remember it. I think this is going to come into play later on when we get to talking more about Joseph and what's going on with Joseph. And I'll save it till then. So just kind of remember this instance, and we'll talk about it later. Go ahead.
Judah is elevated to kind of first place among the sons, or this is part of it?
So Jeff is going way ahead of my notes here. Okay, well, we'll spill the beans now.
Just to say, this does have serious repercussions.
Right, so we have this issue, and this is something that would be, completely wrong. This is not something that he should have done. So Reuben, the firstborn, has done this just egregious thing, really against Jacob, if you will. And then you had his second and thirdborn son, Simeon and Levi, who did this attack on Shechem against his will. So suddenly, these first three sons aren't looking so great here so far. So when you get to the younger ones, like Judah, it is interesting that, maybe this is something who should be elevated. But also, there's an instance with Judah where he does some things that maybe weren't the smartest either. So just keep that in mind. I guess I'll leave it there. We can talk about it more. But
This is important because not only if the firstborn is blessed because he gets a double portion, but he also cares for the parents. I think this is almost like Jacob saying, I can't trust Reuben. I can't trust Levi
and Simeon.
and Simeon. And I don't want them to be responsible for me when I'm old.
Well, and we're going to, when we get to the stuff about Joseph, we're going to see how that plays out a little bit more, because it does seem that Jacob does have trust issues with Reuben. And it comes out very clearly, because Reuben tries to do something, Jacob's not fond of it. Then Judah basically says the same thing, and he says, yeah, go for it. Well, I want to talk about that more when we get to it, because I want the context for that. But keep these things in mind, because these are not forgotten about. These are not lost upon Jacob. He's well aware of what's going on here. When we get to verses 23 through 26, it gives us another listing of Jacob's 12 sons. We do see Jacob eventually rejoining Isaac in Hebron. Isaac, as we talked about before, he lived to 180 years. And when he dies, he's buried by his sons Esau and Jacob. So it seems that Jacob and Esau were together for at least one more meeting for the funeral of their father, not unlike Isaac and Ishmael, who came together one last time when they buried their father Abraham. So kind of a similar thing there. But I think this is the last time we see Jacob and Esau together at any point. I think after that they don't really interact. Of course, their descendants will, but that's another thing. Yeah, one more thing I want to mention while we're here, talking about the death of Rachel again. She was clearly Jacob's favorite wife, which we've talked about how favoritism is maybe a problem with Jacob and Esau and their parents. We've seen it now go to Jacob and his wives. It's going to move on to the next generation. Jacob is going to have a favorite son, and that's going to be Joseph, the oldest of Rachel's two sons. And then when Joseph is taken away to Egypt, it becomes Benjamin. And this is clear as day to everyone. Everyone knows this. This is obvious. This causes problems in the family every step of the way. So I always want to bring this up because, it's talked about sometimes like, who's your favorite child? Or which one do you think is the best? And good parents are always like, well, I love my children in their own way. But like Jacob makes he doesn't hide any of this. And that causes a lot of problems between the family. But that's all I have to say about 35. Any other comments, questions, thoughts on that? All right, I'm skipping 36. We'll talk more about it later because this doesn't really have much to do with Jacob. I'm going to skip to 37. Genesis 37, verses 1 through 11. We see that Jacob continues to live in the land of Canaan as his father had. It talks about, his favorite being Joseph. It's more obvious here. He gives him this richly ornamented robe to Joseph. This makes Jacob's other sons very jealous of Joseph. They hate his brother. And when it says, stuff like, their negative feelings toward him, I think this is a pretty strong negative thing. Like, not just, it's my annoying little brother who, I despise this guy. Like, he is the bane of my existence sort of feel. Like, I don't think this is just an annoyance. This clearly has caused problems in the family, and we're going to see it play out in just a moment. We have Joseph telling about these dreams that he has. He tells them to his father and his brothers. His brothers, they kind of scoff at this. Jacob does rebuke him a little bit also, but it also says that he keeps the matter in mind. And I wonder if he keeps this matter in mind because of what God had said to him back when he was in Bethel, talking about a line of kings that were going to descend from him. And then you have these dreams that Joseph is telling about, these symbols bowing down to his symbol, if you will. I wonder if he is thinking about that when Joseph is telling these dreams later on. So Jacob is not fond of what he's saying here, but also he's not dismissing it either. So kind of at least a little bit of a credit to Jacob there. When we get into Genesis 37, verses 12 through 36, we see that Jacob has, and I think actually translations will call him Israel in this section of verses, which again, like I said, is not, it goes back and forth. I don't have a clear way of saying like, why does it sometimes call him Jacob and then a few times it calls him Israel. But he sends Joseph off to find his brothers who are out with the flocks to bring back word of them. In my notes it says work of them. I know that's a typo. To bring back work, or to bring back the word of how they're doing. When Joseph finally catches up with them, they see him and they plot to kill him. We would call this premeditated in legal circles. Is not, it was just, he said something and in just that instance in some throw of passion, I did something I shouldn't have done. Is they are talking about doing murder here. They are openly discussing it amongst themselves. Oh, here comes Joseph. Let's kill this guy. How are we going to pull this off? And in our legal system, that usually accounts for a bit more punishment for something like that. They clearly thought about doing this. This is really sad. That's, I think, the worst about it is this favoritism has broken down this family and divided this family so much that they're like, let's just kill this guy. And they're all in on it. They're all interested in getting rid of him, which is really, really sad. So they plot to kill him, but Reuben again, he is the firstborn. And he's supposed to be the one in charge when dad's not around. He intervenes. He instructs him, let's just throw him into the cistern. And it tells us that, Reuben planned to return and then, take take Joseph and return with Jacob unharmed. So Reuben is trying to find a way to fix this. Not necessarily maybe the best. Maybe he should have just stood up and said, hey, y'all, this is a bad idea. Y'all need to fix yourselves before you interact with your brother. You all need to take a step back. But he tries to kind of split it both ways so that it looks like he's kind of going along with his brother. So there's some sort of punishment against Joseph, but also to try to spare Joseph for the sake of his father Jacob. But when Joseph arrives, his brothers strip him of his richly ornamented robe. They throw him into the cistern, and they sit down to eat, which is just kind of interesting to me. Is they've done this thing, and now it's like, okay, it's tea time. It's time to eat. We're just going to let him be in there, and we're going to eat for a while. And as they're eating, there's a caravan of Ishmaelites who are going by, and it's Judah actually who suggests that they sell Joseph to the caravan of Ishmaelites. So Judah here is not totally in the right here, because we would say this is escalating it a little bit. Okay, yeah, they thrown him in the cistern, but they could just get him out at any time. He says, well, let's not just shed his blood for nothing. Let's get a little something out of it. Let's get some money. So let's sell him off to these Ishmaelites. It would be as if he was dead because we won't have to worry about him anymore, but we won't actually shed blood, and we'll get some money out of it. So everyone wins, except for Joseph, but they don't really care about that. So this is what they end up doing. The other brothers agree to this. They sell Joseph to the caravan of Ishmaelites, and they sell him for 20 shekels of silver. But except for Reuben, who must have not been present when this happened, because contextually, when he finds out later that the cistern is empty, he tears his clothes. So obviously he was not around when they sold him off. Reuben, I don't know if he was distracted or he'd gone off somewhere else for a moment, but he was not part of that, and he realizes what's happened. The brothers of Joseph, they cover up this by killing a goat, dipping Joseph's robe in it, and they show the bloodstained robe to Jacob, make him think that his son was killed by wild animals. Jacob tears his clothes, he puts on sackcloth, he mourns for his son Joseph, because in his mind Joseph is dead. All his sons, well, we don't know about Benjamin for sure, because he's not really talked about here. Maybe not Benjamin, but all of his other sons know exactly what has happened. Joseph is not dead, but none of them is going to snitch. They're all going to be in on this plot, and they're just going to go along with it, and they're just going to watch their father mourn for his son as if he was dead. His sons and his daughters, they try to comfort him to no avail, but we see that Joseph, meanwhile, is sold to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials in Egypt. And then the narrative of Genesis is going to follow Joseph for quite a bit after that. Comments, questions, thoughts about Jacob, Joseph, the brothers, how this has really not worked out well for any of them yet. Clearly God has a plan here, but this is a bad family dynamic that Jacob has created here. Any thoughts? Okay, Jeff.
Always right to do God's will, whatever that is. And there's no substitute for that. Reuben goes to the pit. He snuck over there. He was just going to get Joseph out, take him to his father. And when he doesn't find him there, he says, the lad has perished. Something's happened to him. Where can I go? Almost as if I can't go back home now.
Because he would be responsible for his well-being as the oldest son in a way.
So what you have is an interesting culture here in these brothers. case, the other, I suspect there may have been other brothers who felt that they shouldn't do this, but they didn't want to speak up. This is where individual courage has to come in our lives, that we can stand up, even if we're discarded by the people, by the group, even if we're considered anathema. We have to be strong enough to stand up ourselves. Judah and Reuben seem to have a desire to do the right thing, but not strong enough. It's almost like Jesus talks about the lukewarm in
Yeah,
Revelation 3.
that's kind of what I was thinking too.
You have to go ahead and be totally committed to God, and otherwise, then you're unfaithful. And so, but there's a lot of great comparisons to what sometimes we face in our lives, even in smaller groups. The influence can be very powerful to go along with whoever speaks first.
Yeah, and it is interesting. Like none of, neither Reuben nor Judah seem to be interested in really killing their brother outright, but neither of them seem to speak up and say, hey, all of this that we're doing is wrong and we need to figure this out. Yeah, that's kind of the crux of it, is it's halfway, or it's kind of trying to play both sides or thread the needle, whatever expression you want to use there. Doesn't work a lot of the times. Now, certainly God's hand is here in this. God is going to do something with this situation. We know how Joseph and his situation is going to lead him to great things and to do great things for people, and is going to save lives, which is, if you look at the situation now, that seems like a ridiculous notion. But Joseph is going to play a critical role in history. I'm not just saying for his family or just for quote-unquote Bible history. For civilization as a whole, there is a terrible famine that's going to come up, and him being there, the right place at the right time, still wanting to serve God and do the right thing, is going to deliver a lot of people from death, from just starving to death. Now, I'm not going to talk about all of those details because I'm not focusing on Joseph. So unless you all have any other comments, questions, thoughts, I'm going to skip to Genesis 42, where we talk about Jacob a little bit more, because again, I'm trying to focus on Jacob for this time being, and then when we get past him, we're going to go to Judah. We're not really going to talk about Joseph directly, except for his interactions with those people. So unless anyone has any other comments, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to skip a little bit of time here. Okay, let's go to Genesis 42. Again, I'm just going to kind of summarize here, so if you got anything you want to say or comment on, go ahead. But like as I said, we don't really see Jacob again until Genesis 42. This is when the famine has struck the land, and it's not just localized to Egypt. We think about Joseph being in Egypt, and that's where he is, that's where the famine's going to be, but it seems to be more than just that region. It's much more severe than that. It's even affecting Canaan. So when Jacob learns that there's grain in Egypt, he sends his sons to go buy some, except for Benjamin. Benjamin stays behind with Jacob. He fears harm for him. He doesn't want anything bad to happen to him. Again, this seems to be that Benjamin is now the new favorite son, or maybe he's just too young for the journey. Maybe some of both. So the 10 sons of Jacob go to Egypt, where their brother Joseph has become the governor of the land. Of course, they do not know that yet. Joseph recognizes them. They don't recognize him. Of course, they would have never thought that he would ever show up again. As far as they were concerned, he was gone. And when Joseph recognizes them, he accuses them of being spies. They deny it. They talk about, this is my family. This is where we came from. He has them in prison for 3 days. Then he releases them, except for one, allows them to take food back to their family, but they must return with this youngest son that they mentioned, the youngest son of Jacob, as proof of their testimony, basically. And I believe the one that he keeps back is Simeon, not Reuben, which I think this is on. I don't know if Joseph knew that Reuben had this other plan to spare Joseph. I think he's sending Reuben back because he's the oldest. He needs to keep this group together. There needs to be some authority figure along the way. He definitely knows about Simeon's problems back in Genesis 34. That's really more my thought than anything else. And the brothers, it's funny, they speak to each other like this is punishment for what we did to Joseph. they clearly still remember this. This is still in their mind. They have this guilt. They know that they have done wrong. They still have that guilt. They're like, this is God paying us back for what we did to Joseph. Reuben kind of chimes in. He says, I told you shouldn't have harmed him. And it's like, okay, could have done a little bit more than that, Reuben. But anyway, he allows them to go back, all except for Simeon. And they get back along the way. The brothers find that their money has been returned to them as well in their sacks of grain. They're frightened about this. This was not their plan to have this happen. Now it looks like they've stolen this grain. So they're frightened by that. When they return to Jacob, they tell him what's happened. Jacob blames these 9 sons for the loss of Joseph and now Simeon. He may be just in a fit of grief here. There's no indication that that he thought they had any hand in Joseph's death necessarily, but he seems to be in a fit of grief here. He refuses to let them go back with Benjamin to Egypt to have Simeon returned. And here is kind of where I kind of mentioned this earlier. I was alluding to it anyway. Reuben promises to Jacob that he'll protect Benjamin when they go back, and if I don't return to him, you can put my sons to death as some sort of exchange if Benjamin does not return. Jacob refuses this still. He does not want any harm to come to Benjamin, despite Reuben's promise here, which is an extremely, I would even say it reckless. Why would that be the exchange of the promise? To have your own sons die? I mean, that's Jacob's grandsons. That doesn't make sense. But he's trying to show how serious he is about this, and that he can take this responsibility. But Jacob refuses this. This is not going to happen. And I'm gonna quickly go through Genesis 43, even though I know we're kind of out of time. The famine continues in Genesis 43. All the grain that Jacob's family had acquired from Egypt is, it's going away. They need to go back. Jacob tells his sons to go back and get more grain, but Judah reminds Jacob that we can't go back to Egypt without Benjamin. We remember this guy who imprisoned us, and he imprisoned Simeon, let the rest of us go, but we have to bring Benjamin back because of what had transpired. And Jacob continues to pass the blame on to his sons for this situation, verse 6. And then Judah makes the guarantee that he's going to protect Benjamin from harm, and he will take personal responsibility for Benjamin's well-being. Jacob then decides to allow Benjamin to go to Egypt with his other sons. So in the previous chapter, Reuben had promised that he would protect Benjamin. Jacob says no. And then later on in this next chapter, Judah says, I'll protect him. And Jacob says, well, okay, we'll let him go with you. Now, there's also another variable in here is they're running out of food. So it could be that Jacob is like, we got no other choice. I've got to let this happen. But it's very interesting that now it's Judah who's assuming this responsibility. So again, this dynamic between the sons it's fluctuating. This is not really what should be going on. Reuben being the firstborn, this would be his responsibility, but it's become Judah's. So I think that's a really important thing to mention here, and we'll maybe talk about more of that when we get to Judah. So Jacob has his sons take some gifts along with them as well. Jacob's good about giving gifts. He had done this with Esau before. He knows how to kind of soften up people in that way. So they travel. They go there. The sons of Jacob, they're afraid. They're not sure what's going to happen when there's this dinner put before them, and they're also afraid about the silver being in their sacks situation. That's still in their mind. They explain their situation to Joseph's steward, and they tell him, "Oh no, we had your payment." Simeon's returned to them. He joins them at this dinner, and they present their gifts to Joseph when he shows up. Again, they don't know it's him yet, and we have Joseph when he sees Benjamin. He has to go away so he can cry because he sees his brother, his full brother, and apparently that's too much for him. So he goes away to weep. He gains his composure. They serve their food separately, which is really interesting here. They have this meal, but the Egyptians, including Joseph, they eat separately because they didn't want to eat with the Hebrews. There's this sort of divide here with them. And is that because of what Abraham's interaction with Pharaoh way back when had caused? You remember when Abraham and Sarah, and he said, this is my sister, and Pharaoh tries to take her as a wife, and then God has to intervene, and there's this whole thing. And I don't know if that's what the Egyptians are remembering. These Hebrews, these sons of Abraham, we're not going to eat with them at the same table. We're going to keep ourselves separate. Just kind of an interesting callback. We're not exactly sure, but that might be part of it. Or it could be their profession as shepherds. That comes up also too later on. But it does note that Benjamin's portion is 5 times as much as his other brothers, which is funny in its own way, but clearly showing some symbol there or preference for Benjamin. I'm going to stop there. We're past time, but I wanted to just get through that point here. So there's more that we're going to talk about this, but we'll have more to talk about this in just a bit, but we're out of time. So we're going to finish talking about Jacob and his kind of story in Genesis. I assume we're going to finish that next week. And then when we do so, I'm going to talk about Jacob and how the later Old Testament and New Testament verses talk about him as a person and his place in God's plan, because there actually is quite a bit there. And it talks about a lot of God's relationship with Jacob, not just his descendants, his nation, but him as a person as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that next week, hopefully, as well, and then we'll move on to Judah. But we'll stop there. I'm out of time. But I thank you all for your patience and your kind thoughts.